Thank you for being with us. The first thing I'd like to do is to introduce very briefly our panelists, and then afterwards each panelist will spend more time explaining what she does and why she does what she does. But first, our three panelists basically are Linda Dougherty, who is the Associate Superintendent for Catholic Identity at the Archdiocese of New York. Then we have Diana Marin, who's a theology master's candidate at Harvard University and the project manager for the Dominican Sisters Charism initiative. And she's a Theologian-in-Residence with the Nuns and Nones Land Justice team. And then we have Germaine Laviscount Scott. Germaine is an alum, and she's a retired educator and presently a board member for the AHRC, New York City, which is an organization that advocates for the rights of the developmentally and intellectually disabled people. So before we begin our session, and before I ask the candidates to speak more at length about their backgrounds and why they do what they do, I would ask you to join me in a brief prayer. Let us recall that we are in the presence of God. And so we pray. Loving and faithful God, we thank you for your presence with us at this time. Give us clear minds and peaceful hearts as we gather together. Teach us to listen to and learn from each other as we place our conversation and ourselves in your hands. May your peace be in our hearts, your grace be in our words, and your love in our actions, now and always. Amen.
Amen.
Now, I will ask each of our candidates, listen to me, we're running for office here, each of our panelists to give you a summary of their life and all they do for the people of God. And as we proceed through this panel, if you at any point when the panelists are finished, if you have any questions, please use the chat room to present or ask your questions or your comments. And then we will do our best to respond to each of those. All right. So our first panelist, Linda Dougherty, would you be able to begin?
Yes, absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being a part of this evening. As Sister said, I am presently the Associate Superintendent for Catholic Identity. I have held that position since last summer. Prior to that, I really started in a very traditional field as a teacher, teaching in Catholic schools. I had an opportunity to teach in public schools. And I always like to say that while I do have a strong background in religious studies from Boston College, mostly I think my background comes from my family. We were very much working middle class family, and we were not necessarily a pious family. We were churchgoers. I think the biggest example were my parents, who believed in living the faith. They were actively involved in many parish activities, but also I witnessed them giving and sharing with others, whether it be family in need or people around us or reaching out beyond our neighborhood. Their example of what it meant to live a life as a good Catholic Christian is what spoke most deeply to me, and gave me the opportunity to develop my own faith in many ways. And so I went on to teach. And although my degree was in education, I always had an interest in religious studies, and I pursued that at Boston College in the summers. as well as other degrees to become an educational administrator. So I taught many years, then I went on to be a principal in Catholic schools for 25 years. And then 5 years as a regional superintendent, I supervised the schools in the northeast part of the Bronx. And this past year, I was invited to take this position when there was a vacancy. This position is very challenging. As you know, our Catholic schools are struggling in many ways financially, probably being the greatest. But we also look at our student body. Many of them are non-Catholic, and that is a gift and a challenge. We look at our teachers. Many of them, you probably remember, you had religious sisters in school. We have very few in our schools right now. So many of our teachers did not have the training that the sisters received. They did not have the spiritual formation either. And now they are challenged with keeping the faith alive. And that is true for our principals as well. They are very dedicated and hardworking. And there are requirements for the teachers, whether they have gone through Catholic school or not. They are expected to be prepared, just as they are expected to be prepared for teaching the general subjects. So we live in very challenging times in all areas, but particularly in Catholic education. And we look to how we can make a difference. And my title, Catholic identity, people say, what does that mean? It says Catholic school, right? It says Catholic identity really refers to the Catholic culture that we are all a part of. Our heritage, everybody has fond memories of the past. Sister Margaret shared a great story with us before when we were talking about, her experience in high school. We all have great experience with the sisters, with priests, brothers, whomever we had teaching us, as well as the dedicated lay faculty. We don't want to lose that heritage of who we are, where we came from. Genealogy is a big thing these days. Well, it's true for us as Catholics. Where we go, and we want to maintain that. We never want to water down who we are as Catholics. And that is the challenge we have, particularly when we have not only non-Catholic students in our schools, but we have many parents who want a Catholic education for their child, sometimes not for religious reasons, sometimes for moral reasons. They want their children to know right from wrong, and sometimes for safety. And sometimes it's an opportunity for them to also explore the Catholic faith. So, there's a saying that every crisis is a challenge and an opportunity. And I think that's very true. I work very closely with the teachers and principals to try and support them in this and give them wonderful experiences of our faith if they have not had them before. So for me also, it's a great opportunity to live my faith, kind of not just the studies I had, but who and what we are in many different ways, in service and in prayer, that are appropriate for the times we live in.
Thank you, Linda. And we'll get back to you, I'm sure. All right. Diana, Marin, would you please share your thoughts with us?
Of course. Thank you, Sister Margaret. It's so good to be here with you all. I've had, as I imagine you all have had, so many Zoom calls, and I'm still so grateful for this tool so that we can connect with one another. I'm currently calling from Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I'm glad that we could be together in this space. I imagine many of you are calling from New York City or from dispersed around the area, but I'm glad that we can connect in this way. I'm originally from Queens and have had a background in Catholic education through the Archdiocese of New York, where I worked previously to coming here to Cambridge. I'm currently a Master's of Divinity school student, graduating hopefully next month from Harvard Divinity. Thank you. Very excited.
Very
And I've been studying theologies of repair and liberation. I'll speak a little bit more about that, but I also want to share some of the work that I do outside of divinity school and some of what brought me here, brought me to this space and with these questions. So besides my studies, I also work as a project manager for the Dominican Charism initiative. And this is an online platform, an educational tool that houses the history and spirituality of the Dominican Sisters International. And I've gotten to learn a little bit more about what it means, what a charism means, and what it means to share about the spirituality and history of a particular group, or a sister congregation, I should say. And I'm just fascinated by this word charism. I've grown to learn that it is this very particular Catholic mystical term that animates us, that brings us together to do the work that we are chosen to do in the world. It is alive within us, and it makes us more alive. And when I first started doing this work, it really intrigued me because I was curious about the future of spiritual and religious life. I was really wondering, after having worked at the Archdiocese of New York and having worked alongside Catholic educators, how is our faith changing in this current landscape? What are the times calling of us in this moment? And so I came across this term charism, and I've been surprised to learn how it is responsive to our times. It keeps growing and it keeps finding new fruition. Alongside that work, I get to be a Theologian-in-Residence with an organizing group of multi-generational and intergenerational organizers called Nuns and Nuns. And this group, I get to sit with and study how we are in relationship to one another, to our properties, and to our resources. And within that, I get to weave in my studies around theologies of liberation and theologies of repair in looking at what is the current call among faith communities, Christian faith communities as a whole, in reckoning with harms of prior colonial harms, current colonial harms, and the call within Christian communities to be sources of liberation and sources of hope. So holding these two in tension, knowing that there's been histories of harm, but then there's also incredible theologies, incredible opportunities to create deeper foundations of spirituality and even more pronounced ways to do right and do well in the world. So with that, I'm sure we're going to have so much more time to talk and share, but very grateful to be here with you all, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Diana, and now we will move to our third panelist, Germaine Laviscount Scott, who was, I said, a cathedral alum.
Yes. I'd like to say hello to everyone. I'm really very happy to be here. I'm looking forward to sharing my faith journey with all of you, and I'm hoping to hear about your faith journeys. As Sister said, I am a graduate of Cathedral from 1962, so it's going back a ways, but I'm very proud of the education I received at Cathedral. I think the biggest thing in terms of my journey, my faith journey, has been that there was a time that I really, I wasn't really very forward about saying that I'm a Christian, saying that I'm a Catholic. I didn't feel that that was necessary. I didn't feel that that was something that I needed to let people know about me. And sometimes I was like embarrassed or afraid. As I've gotten older, my faith is very, very important to me, and I'm not afraid to talk about it. As a Catholic, it's funny because I was born in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and my parents, when they came here, my mother, who was a very Christian woman, a very not religious is not the word, a spiritual woman. She believed in going to church, right? My father, who was actually born a Catholic but did not practice, was with my mother, who was not Catholic either, but she went to church every Sunday, and she made us go to church every Sunday. And she chose the Catholic church that was nearby. So it was quite by accident that my brothers and I were there, and we were ushered along with the other students or other children who were going to religious instruction. They asked us if we were Catholic, and very honestly, we weren't sure. But we found out that yes, we were baptized in the Catholic Church back in the Virgin Islands in the West Indies. So it's almost like serendipity that, wow, you're a Catholic and you're a Christian. Well, we knew we were a Christian. That point about a Catholic and a Christian, one of the things that I've learned as I've journeyed in my faith is it's not so much about being a Catholic. And I'm not, again, I'm proud to say that I'm a Catholic woman, but it's more about saying that I'm a Christian woman. For me, that space that occupies my feelings about God and religion, it's a much bigger space, and it's much more accepting of others who may not be Catholic, but they have the attributes of Christians. At the present time, I'm retired. I've been retired for a number of years, and I serve on the board of an organization called AHRC NYC, and it's an organization that deals with helping to take care, I don't want to say take care of, but meet the needs of intellectually and disabled people, intellectually disabled people. And it just so happens that I am the mother of a 40-year-old man. He'll always be my young man, but he is 40 years old now. And being a member of this board, I'm doing something for other people who have children. He's not a child, but who have children like my child. My son is Gregory. His name is Gregory Brandon Scott. He's the light of my life. And when he was born, I'll tell you frankly, I was angry with God. Have you ever been angry with God? Have any of you ever been angry with God? Mm-hmm. I was angry with God. It took me a while. And at this point in my journey, I recognized God as supreme and God as sovereign. He knew what he was doing. He knows what he is doing. I may not understand, and I have lots of questions and concerns, but I believe in my heart that God knows what he's doing and why he's doing it. So in terms of community, I think it's so important that we reach out to each other. At my church, I'm part of a group, and we get on the phone every Saturday morning, and we talk to each other about our faith journeys, and we talk to each other about what's working and what's not working and what's difficult and what we need to be thankful for. And I'm going to stop now, but the last thing I'm going to say is, as an older person, gratitude is the biggest part of my life. I have so much to be thankful for, even though I have hardships and difficulties, as all of us do. Gratitude is something that I live by. Thank you.
Thank you, Germaine. Thank you. And I remind all our our viewers with us, if at any point a question or a comment arises, please feel free to enter it into the chat room. So I have a question that I'd like to really have some quiet time to think about what the beautiful things that were said, but I guess we probably should move on. I have a question for any of the panelists who would like to answer, and the question is, do you ever get discouraged in your work? And how does your faith help you in that discouragement? If anybody would like to offer something.
Well, I think we live in the kind of world that is always, you know, throwing us curveballs, as it were. And I find prayer is something that helps me get through those discouraging times, not giving up. Because it's easy as a human being to give up and say, nah, I can't do this anymore, or this isn't working, or I'm praying and praying and nothing is happening. But if you believe in the sovereignty of God and you believe that He knows, He understands, then you keep praying. You don't stop. You don't give up. So basically, and I think our life will always have ups and downs. The vicissitudes of life are just part of life. We're going to have peaks and we're going to be in valleys. And for me, prayer is one of those things. And turning to my prayer community is one of those things that helps me get through and get over and get by.
I definitely think that prayer is the essential. I agree 100%. There are times when it's discouraging. It's discouraging. Sometimes, particularly people, you know, of great faith, say parents in particular will challenge what we're doing in the schools, or challenge the teachers, challenge the principals. Or, you know, the students are usually very receptive themselves. I remember one time teaching high school students a lesson, and afterwards, one of the boys raised his hands and said, "Do you really believe all that?" So, you know, we're constantly being questioned, and it makes you stop and think, what do I believe? And how do I project what I believe? Right. And some places are more difficult to work. And sometimes it's a drop in a bucket, and sometimes it's, you know, an overflowing water bucket. But what Germaine said about prayer is essential. And I think the other thing is not that the prayers are diminished in any way, but one thing I often tell my students, the teachers, the principals, is that you are part of a faith network, a faith community. And the best thing you can do is be a part of that. Go to church, go to a function, a prayer experience, and experience that, so that the days that are difficult and disappointing and discouraging, you are lifted up by the others who share your beliefs. And I really believe that we all have to have some network, whether it is through prayer, or sometimes it's a cup of coffee or a laugh. Sometimes it's a cry, but someone's there to hand you the tissues. So it's essential to have people of prayer and to always look up.
Yeah, on this note of prayer, when I first started my degree, one of our first required readings was this short essay by Simone Weil, the 20th century Catholic mystic. She has an essay called Reflections on the Right Use of School Studies with a View to the Love of God. It's a long title, but it's basically says, you could consider your schoolwork or any work that you do a type of prayer. And I remember reading that and just feeling like, great, this is a way for my instructors to just like give a lot of homework and give us a lot of really hard work and just say, well, this is for your spiritual growth. And I like bristled against that. But over the course of these past few years of study, have felt like, yeah, there's something to infusing our day-to-day with prayer, infusing the work that we do with prayer. And sometimes prayer for me doesn't feel very verbal. Sometimes it just feels embodied. Like I just have to sit at my computer and like type this essay, or I just have to do this reading, or I just have to go to class. And another thing that I still sit with from that essay of Simone Weil's is that she writes something along the lines of like, the student shouldn't keep too much attention to the results, to their results. And as like a perfectionist, and the perfectionist in me bristles even more against that because I want to do really well. But there is, I think, a humility in being able for me to just do what I'm doing, try my best. Sometimes it's not the best. Sometimes I'm having a really hard moment. Maybe there's like too much going on. And then there's COVID, and then we're on Zoom class, and it's been a relief for me to go back to that text and realize, actually, that's okay. I don't have to do my best. That has helped me a lot in the discouraging moments.
Thank you.
Diana, you also mentioned offering up as prayer what you're doing. Yeah, and many years ago, someone said that to me, the difficulty that I was having with my son, as I said, he's intellectually disabled, and I just offered it up. It didn't make it easier. The task was still just as difficult, but it made it easier to bear, as it were. I offered that up to God.
Yeah, I think there can be such a freedom when I feel less attached to the results. And it actually, to me, what I hear and what you're saying to Germaine is that there's, it allows room for grace to come in when we can have that spaciousness within us to just be. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
There's a comment in the chat room that one person submitted, which reads, "Every day I write 10 things I am grateful for."
It's a good exercise, yeah.
And another question that was directed more so to one of the panelists. First, I'll read the question. How did you get your prayer group started? And that was addressed more to you, Germaine?
Well, the prayer group was started quite a while ago, but it's picked up steam since the pandemic, as you might imagine, because people can't, for a while there, we weren't going into the church. Although someone once said, don't just go to church, be the church. That's a tall order. But so all the time that we were at home during the pandemic, there's always somebody who needs prayer for something. And so it wasn't that difficult to get it started. We just called each other and who do you know that would like to be part of this? And we're very open in the sense that everybody on the line is not a Catholic, but they're someone who believes in the teachings of Christ. And so they fit into this group. And I think once you start it and people hear about it, it usually blossoms.
And we have another participant who wrote, sometimes I reach out to the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace, whose mission is to pray. And you can write to them on their website with your intentions, if you'd like to do that also. That's the www.csjp.org. I had another question, if I may, put out to our panelists, and that basically could have been addressed somewhat so far, and it's how do you make time for God in all of this?
Yeah.
Anybody?
Sometimes it's hard because of the way things are right now, and there's so much going on. But I sometimes actually lay down in my bed and listen to a meditation. So I'm ready to go to sleep. You know, I'm going to sleep with God's word, you know, in my mind. Yeah, sometimes it's really hard.
I worked with a pastor when I was a principal who was a colorful character, and he said sometimes the best prayer is just to say help. and it doesn't have to be necessarily, you know, the rosary, a standard devotional prayer, or something else. Sometimes it's just talking to God in whatever way you can.
Yeah.
But I always feel you can't give what you don't have. So if I don't fill myself up and pray and have that connection and that relationship with the Lord, then how can I invite others to that? So as I said to you, I did not grow up in a pious devotional home. I often hear stories of families who prayed the rosary together every night. That was definitely not my house. However, we learned to pray in different ways. And again, my mother and father were like, don't read the Bible. We don't know enough to read the Bible. That's up to the priests, and, you know, and that kind of thing was not part of the way I grew up, but I acquired it through people I encountered in my Catholic education. So whatever way you can, as long as you do it, right? You make
exactly
few minutes. Some days it might be 2 minutes. Some days you might be able to do more than that. I love being able to experience the Eucharist every day. And I try to do that every day if possible. That nourishes me in my work, I feel, and in my personal life.
The panelists said that I could interject once in a while, so
yes,
I'm just gonna
please.
But I remember recently I was visiting one of our sisters who was very, very, very sick and extremely sick. And one of the things she said was, I can't pray. And I don't know how it came, but what came out of my mouth was to her. But you just pray with your heart. Your heart wants it, and that's your prayer.
Right.
Don't fret. You're praying. So it's and that takes faith to believe that.
Right.
It does. No.
I think it's also important that we offer each other resources that we're familiar with in terms of our prayer lives. There is an organization, well, it's not an organization, it's part of the Catholic Church. It's the Office of Black Ministry. So I heard about that, and some of my friends at church heard about it. And right now for Holy Week, they have a busy life retreat. I mean, we're so busy and doing so many different things. You may not be able to go away on a retreat or, you know, be apart from your family and your life. But they give you each day, they give you a list of activities, they give you prayers, they send you to those of you who use the computer. I know I'm not like totally computer savvy. I ask for help all the time with the computer, but you can go to the computer and listen to religious music. So they, you know, this was one of the things they said, you know, during this busy time and you're trying to get in a retreat. So again, it's about communicating with each other and sharing with each other resources that we are familiar with.
One participant entered into the chat room a recommendation rather. It reads, speaking of prayer, I recommend the book Learning to Pray by Father James Martin.
Oh,
that was written in there. And
Does fine work. Yeah.
Is it? Yeah.
Very good. Yes.
And I do have another comment which reads, just allow grace to come in. God's grace. Just allow it to come in.
Right. Yeah. when I was a student at Cathedral, although those many years ago, I was a member of the Sodality. I don't know if people are familiar with that group. Yeah, the Sodality, and you know, always praying and always you know, fasting and doing different things. And what happened to me was when I was finished with high school and going on to college, it was like, and I'm assuming that this has happened to others too. It's like, okay, no more religion. Let's use that word. No more religion. I mean, we still need that community with others, and that community with God, that communion with God, I should say. But all the religious things, it's like, for me, it was like, okay, that's enough. That's enough. I've done my share. And my mother, bless her, she's deceased. She prayed for me. She said, Germaine, I want you to go back. I stopped going to church. I stopped doing all of those things. And she always said to me, I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you. I am continuing to pray for you. And I say, Ma, it's okay. It's okay. But she never stopped praying for me. And thank God, before she passed away, I returned to church. So, I mean, again, God saw that picture. I didn't see that picture. You know, for me, it was like, Mommy, stop. You don't need to keep praying for me. You know, I'm okay. So, yeah.
I do have a question from the chat room here. It reads, how often do you fast, or do you have advice on fasting? It's not directed to any of the three of you particularly, but does anybody have a response to that? How often do you fast, or do you have advice on fasting? It's a tough one.
Yeah.
It is. It really is hard to, I would say that it's, I don't do it regularly. So obviously during Lent, and I think you have to be really committed and able to do it health-wise, you know.
Health, exactly. Yeah. And the church, I think, recognizes that at our age, you don't have to fast the way everybody else, you know, a 20-year-old or a 40-year-old is fasting. Is that correct?
Yes, but I will say that intermittent fasting is a popular dieting technique right now, if anybody has heard of it. So let's ask the young one, Diana, what she thinks about it.
I don't fast, but this question does make me think of what else can I, like, how am I thinking of, what's the word? Like limiting or with, or like easing out of. And this actually makes me think of what I was trying to give up for Lent, which was being hard on myself. I think I've previously approached Lent and previously have approached fasts in a way that, like, I shouldn't do this, or I should limit myself in this particular way. And over these past few years have been trying to look at the other side of it, of what can I reduce? What are the qualities in myself that I can try to diminish so that I can open up my heart better? And I think that's the goal of fasting, right? Is to be able to expand and live more deeply into our hearts so that we can be more receptive to God. And so trying to not like be so tough on myself and limit the inner critic that can be really loud in me sometimes. So yeah, putting that one on dialing the tune down on that one.
That's a great perspective on it.
Mm-hmm.
Father James Martin, who was mentioned earlier, tells a story of how when he was with his friends and explaining to his non-Catholic friends about Lenten fasting and abstinence and what you give up for Lent, they started something with him and they said, you know, it's too easy for you to decide what you're giving up for Lent. We're going to choose something.
Something for you.
And that became a tradition where his friends helped him really have a deeper Lenten experience, you know, whatever. Like, I think he liked orange soda or something. I said, that's it, no orange soda for you, you know, during Lent. So it's interesting to look at it, both from what Diana said and, the reflection of Father Martin, what others might see in you, what we see ourselves and what others see in us.
To interject here, I not different perspective, but additional perspective, and it was suggested, I believe, when we had a pre-panel conference last week, and we discussed different topics, and one of the persons there suggested or posed the question, how does social justice enter into your work? How do you see that as part of your work?
Well, being on the board of AHRC NYC, I think we're an organization that's not, it's not so much about taking care of, although that's what we do. We have jobs. We find jobs for people who are developmentally disabled. There are residences that people live in who are developmentally disabled. But I think our focus has become more on having people being treated fairly, equitably, in spite of their disability. I mean, years ago, if you were in a wheelchair and you couldn't get up the steps of your building, it was like, too bad, right? But there's legislation now that buildings have to be accessible. So the idea of social justice is very close to my heart in terms of the disabled, whether they are physically disabled or intellectually disabled. They need to be treated fairly and equitably, and they should be felt to be included in this human race of ours. So sometimes dealing with the disabled is the last thing on anybody's list, even legislators' lists, and we've found that out. So we are, we're an organization, again, I'm just on the board, I don't work for the organization, but there's a lot of activism in terms of passing legislation that will be beneficial to people who are disabled. So it's very much a part of this idea of social justice, is very much a part of my commitment to this organization that I belong to.
I know in the schools, we, as I said earlier, we teach the children service and what that means. So we do a lot of outreach. I'm always very impressed, not only with what the schools actually do, but the students who come up with the ideas. Recently, in terms of helping the Ukrainian refugees, and there was an article just in the Catholic New York. It was started by an 8th grade student at St. Brendan's School in the Bronx, who just said, we should be doing more. His family, his parents are Albanian, and they had gone through something similar before they immigrated to the United States. So obviously he heard this, not only, what we do teach in the schools, but from his own home. And so a collection, a prayer day, many other signs of support were shown. And just, I think first and foremost with children, it's an awareness of what's going on, not just what they see in the news, but what can we do about it? And I know for myself as a teacher, again, my students would always challenge me in ways they didn't know, but we had a service aspect in one of the schools, and the children, the high school students, went and worked in a soup kitchen serving people. And I thought, I can't send them out there and not do it myself. So I would go with them on Saturdays to the soup kitchen, and we treated everyone at that table as if they were in a very nice restaurant, getting them what they needed, pouring their drinks for them. And for me, it was, again, an opportunity to see things differently, because I always tell the kids, sure, we all had jobs, set the table, clean the table. And I didn't think much about it, doing that for my family and my siblings. But somehow when you're doing it for people who this may be their only meal that day, it takes on a different meaning. So the service projects and the work of the church, like that, collecting, doing for the homeless, as well as we encourage our students to become involved in other ways, writing to legislators, but I have to do it myself before I can tell others to do it.
Yeah, I think Catholicism has such a rich legacy and history of social justice in its Catholic social teachings, in liberation theology. There's just so much there and so much there for us to draw on. I've been really, really fascinated by liberation theology these past few years, and have in particular been interested in its failings and how it's actually not really where it is today. It was so, there was such big hopes for it when it first emerged in the 60s, 70s. And I took a class two semesters ago that was investigating the futures of liberation theology. And through that, I got to write a bit about my own wonderings around repair and reparations. And I currently hold a lot of questions of where does our Catholic identity, what does Catholic teaching have to say about this current moment, this current landscape, particularly in the US, where we're continuing to reckon with histories of sexual abuse in the church, where there's growing recognition of the implications of the doctrine of discovery, which allowed and instigated colonization, and where there's now a movement to recognize the ways in which the church has been part of the stealing of land from indigenous peoples in its early history. So these are all questions that feel really alive to me, and as a Catholic person too, make me reckon with where, how do I live into my spirituality, and also reckon with these histories, and also hold that there can be grace found in this work, and in these continual questionings, that there's something that's emerging amongst us to repair, to reconcile, and also a movement towards liberation. I hold a lot of questions about that, and feel very energized for where the church is moving towards, for where our social justice landscape is moving, and feel very hopeful that our faith and the work of social justice organizing, they're not disparate. They really can work hand in hand. And I have so much curiosity and hope for how that'll continue to emerge in the next few years.
Well said.
Very well said. I think we're beginning to move somewhat toward the end of this time. And what I would like to do is, and also if I could remind you, as I keep reminding myself in the beginning of this announcement about this panel, if you read that scriptural quotation, I can do all things in God who strengthens me, which is something that we can all keep with us as we go on. But some of the words so beautifully that were spoken, the words that keep the prayer, community and faith, gratitude, charism, work is prayer, doing is prayer, things that we can take with us throughout the week and the next week and the week after that. Would like to thank all of you for being with us, for your participants, your questions, your comments, and of course, thank you especially to our panelists, Germaine and Linda and Diana, for your beautiful thoughts, for sharing them with us. And I also want to thank Maria Volpe, who was with us on the initial webinar that we had among ourselves with generating some ideas, and to Gina Lombardo, who is the I guess the mastermind behind this, perhaps the
mastermind.
development director of Cathedral High School. Thank you so much for all you've done to make this possible. And also Susan, for your technological expertise. Susan Madden for being with us. I hope I didn't leave anybody out. The one thing I would like to do, and perhaps is most fitting that we should do, is conclude with a prayer, a brief prayer in this upcoming week of Holy Week. And so as we conclude with this prayer, let's continue to keep in our thoughts and prayers the people of Ukraine and all of those associated with bringing them relief and recovery. Let us pray. Loving God, as we begin this Holy Week, bring us closer to you. Prepare a place in our homes and hearts for silence and solitude, so that we may rediscover the grace of a prayer-filled life. Help us to fast from those things that threaten the well-being of body and soul, and teach us the value of simplicity. Enlarge our hearts so that we give to those in need, and in so doing, rediscover the grace of gratitude and of generosity. May this week be a grace-filled time for each of us, that we may strengthen our love for and our faith in you. Amen.